Welcome back. Well, April is Autism Awareness Month, and we're on your side trying to help you understand more about autism and what causes it, some of the factors surrounding it. Joining us today is Michelle Esri, the owner of Full Neurofeedback and Counseling in Hoover. Michelle, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Claire.
So first of all, tell us what causes autism.
You know, that's actually a pretty complex question. Autism is, we talk about it as an autism spectrum, right? It's like a spectrum of issues. And so there are a lot of things that can kind of fall into that spectrum. There are a few things we know for sure through research, like the age of the parents can have an impact, sometimes exposure to different things. There's a genetic predisposition, right? If siblings have autism, then the other sibling is more likely to have autism, things like that. But they are still trying to figure out kind of the root cause underneath. There are some developmental disorders, things like Rett syndrome and Down syndrome that have an impact on autism. But again, we're talking about a spectrum of issues. And so there are a lot of things that kind of fall under that umbrella. So there are a lot of causes.
Now, is it usually diagnosed during childhood?
Often autism is diagnosed during childhood, usually early childhood, when you start to notice maybe some of the developmental milestones aren't being met. It's something that often a pediatrician will begin to catch. You know, for example, they don't start speaking quite as soon as you think they might. Lack of eye contact, maybe repetitive movements or sounds. There are a number of other symptoms kind of like that that your pediatrician is screening for those things. So if you're having regular well checks, your pediatrician is probably going to start to note some of those things that maybe aren't quite where you would expect them to be. And eventually they'll recommend that you go and get some testing for autism. And so often it's caught early in childhood, as long as people are kind of sticking with the normal pediatric well checks.
And you noticed that you mentioned that the pediatrician will catch some of this. Are there any signs that parents need to look for?
You know, so pediatricians are going to catch some of the more severe cases, but there are a lot of cases that are kind of a little bit more on the cusp, maybe higher functioning people with autism. And those are things that parents maybe are going to start to notice. Maybe they didn't catch it as early, maybe a little bit on the speech thing, maybe a little bit. I'll say some of the things that parents might notice are obsession with a very specific thing. Now that can happen for any kid, right? A child can be obsessive, but an obsession with a very specific topic, like needing to know everything about that topic, having difficulty with social cues, not understanding or being able to read clearly the emotions of others, or not responding in an emotionally equivalent way, right? So what that means is somebody has a feeling or experience, we would normally as kids kind of start to pick up on, oh, I can see when they're smiling, they feel happy, and I can smile in response. And when some of that isn't happening, again, repetitive movements, some sleep issues can be connected to autism. But I think if somebody is really concerned, there are really good assessments, just little checklists you can go through and say, okay, are 5 or 6 of these symptoms present? Maybe I should look into getting an assessment.
Absolutely. Is there any cure for autism?
So that's a big question. For some of the developmental disorders, there's some really good treatment options, but I would say autism generally, it's kind of generally understood to be something that you can treat, but not cure, if that makes sense. It has to do with how the brain of the person works. And some things can be incredibly benefited through treatment, right? Through occupational therapy, through mental health treatment, through different kinds of medical therapies. You can see a ton of improvement in symptoms. But generally speaking, we're dealing with developmental brain body disorders that aren't going to be something that changes in the person. So again, I think one of the things that's kind of tricky with autism is we can see it as a major issue, and it can create really difficult challenges for families. But autistic kids are kids with their own special way of seeing the world and understanding things. And so I think it's important to see that curing it might not always be what's necessary, you know, helping them to experience their best life, to enjoy things through the way that they are able to enjoy things, to be able to function in a way that is as full as they can. That's going to be really, really successful. You know, there are a lot of people who probably aren't autism spectrum who are really good at specific career paths, and they're very successful in different parts of society. And so just recognizing that there's some real ways that a person who maybe they are diagnosed autistic can really thrive with appropriate treatment. You want to reduce some of the negative symptoms through
Mhm.
different therapies, but can really be thriving. A cure isn't necessarily a needed thing if you're looking
Right.
at it as a way for them to just grow into the person they are.
I love that. I love that. And also, uh, destigmatizing it as well.
Yeah,
I love that. As we wrap up, I know you sent me some websites with some information. Can you share
right.
that with our viewers? Some resources for families.
There are some really great resources out there. I'd say, one of the really greatest spots to start in Alabama is the Alabama Department of Mental Health has a list of resources. The websites I sent you are listed on there also, but I would say if you look up the Alabama Department of Mental Health, they have a list of resources for people with dealing with autism in Alabama, and they're going to be a really great starting place.
I love that. Well, Michelle Essery, the owner of Full Well Neurofeedback and Counseling in Hoover, we appreciate you being with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.